Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Joy Webb, and I will be moderating this session called Embedding Racial Equity in Your Giving Circle. I am here with some great speakers and friends, Tracey and Muhi, and I will let them introduce themselves because I want to jump right into this great session. So I'll start with Tracey, and then we can pass the mic.
Thank you, Joy. Can I say I've been waiting on this session all day long? My name is Tracey Greene-Washington. I'm the president of the Indigo Innovation Group, which focuses on providing strategic thought partnership and coaching to philanthropic and nonprofit organizations that are really trying to be bold and audacious around equity and structural change. But in addition to that role, I'm the founder of CoThinkk, which is a social change philanthropy that's structured as a giving circle that is really committed to giving our time, talent, and treasure in service to shifting a narrative for communities of color in Asheville and Western North Carolina, and really figuring out how we can center racial equity and also moving structural change and transformational change in our community. Good to be here with everyone.
Likewise, my name is Muhi Khwaja. I am the co-founder of the American Muslim Community Foundation, which started back in 2016. I've been in fundraising and nonprofit leadership since 2009, hailing from Michigan, currently living in California. Really passionate about philanthropy because I see everybody as a philanthropist, and philanthropy being more about generosity than it is about wealth. And I'm really excited for today's conversation and just want to learn with each and every one of you and share a few tidbits about what AMCF is doing with our giving circles to make sure that we are focusing on racial equity in our grant making. Thank you, Tracey and Joy.
Well, we're going to jump right in. And to jump right in, I'm going to let Tracey talk a little bit about level setting racial equity, because that's very important as we do this work. So Tracey, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I think we have a couple of slides that we want to share with our friends here. And so one of the things that we felt was important when this session came up is that the powerful word of using embedding racial equity in our social justice work, we wanted to be really explicit about what that meant, because sometimes it can be a little fluffy, right? So one of the things that I wanted you to pay attention to, even the word embedding is about firmly putting something in place. And when we talk about our giving circle work and the work of racial equity, it is about centering it in the middle, not on the fringes of our work, and really baking it into everything that we do and what we see and what we envision as we move forward. And so one of the things we want to do from a level setting perspective is really to drop down into the space and say, what does it really mean to center racial equity? And so one of the things I want to start out by saying is level setting with language. What is racial equity? When we talk about racial equity, it is a condition that will be achieved if one's racial identity no longer was a predictor about how they fared in society and were able to thrive. And that's important because if we don't anchor ourselves in a language, we won't know exactly how we operationalize that in our giving circles and live out that in terms of that vision. And if you go to the next slide. As we anchor ourselves in racial equity, what's important also to know is that it is asking us to have a racial equity lens. And when we talk about having a racial equity lens, it's important to say that you're being explicit about naming who exactly you're talking about and centering in this work. You're being explicit about the data and information about race and ethnicity. You're being explicit about understanding the disparities and the reasons they exist and the structural root causes of it. And you're also naming race in a very explicit way, not in an implicit way, and talking about the problems and the solutions that are aligned and can be most transformative in the communities that you're supporting and the partnerships that you're having with your grantees. The additional thing I want to say is that that is just the beginning of this process. When we talk about embedding and centering racial equity, we're also talking about its commitment to shift from a place of business as usual, of how we do our work, to real structural change where we're asking questions of policies, practices, behaviors, and our thinking and our narratives that play out in our community and in our work every day. But in addition to that, we're also talking about and and really asking each of us to be intentional about how we do deep equity work and systems change work at the same time. And when I talk about deep equity work, I'm talking about the work that we do at all 4 levels of talking about oppression and racism. We're talking about our I work, our beliefs, our values. We're talking about our interpersonal work in terms of our relationships with one another. We're talking about the work we do actually in our giving circles as this institution in community and in places. And we're talking about it from a structure and systems place in terms of how we walk in it every day. It should feel like water fills the fish if we're doing it in a way that's very intentional. But it's not enough for us to do the deep equity work. We also have to hold this piece around systems change. And when we talk about systems change, I like to reference FSG's model of talking about the 6 conditions of systems change. And we talk about that we have to shift our mental models and our narratives and be aware of our biases, both implicit and explicit, right? That we have to be clear about talking about relationships, power dynamics, the way we are moving with each other, and talking about policies and practices in our communities. And the other thing that we have to be clear about is that we have to be clear about how we embrace processes strategies, because this work takes time. It's not immediate. So we have to do our work to build our muscles both around awareness, the noticing of things, to building our muscles around analysis. What does that mean? To us being clear about what does it mean for us to be an ally in this space. And if I know if I have deeper awareness, analysis, and I know what my role is, what does that mean from the actions that I take, and how am I going to be accountable in community? But the last thing I want to emphasize is that all of this doesn't matter if you're not activated. And so it calls for you to be a racial equity champion. And when I talk about a racial equity champion, I'm not talking about someone who wants to support this work or advocate or lead it. I'm talking about a champion that is taking risks, that is providing cover, that's standing in the gap, and being very explicit when they move into rooms as they move forward. If you go to the next slide. And so in order to begin this work, it's important to understand and lean into this posture that this work is not linear. It's very iterative. It has a lot of bumps and bruises along the way. It creates discomfort. But the beautiful thing about this comfort for me is just an indicator that we're growing. It's just our growing edges. We also have to embrace this posture of emergent. And when I talk about emergent, is that we're always learning. It's a new muscle. So you're doing, and learning as you go along the way in terms of centering racial equity. And the last thing I want to just emphasize is that it's cyclical. You don't go through the cycle one time. It loops over and over and over. As you learn more, you do more. I always talk to my clients, and I have this saying that about racial equity and centering it in our work is that when we can see it, we can name it. And when we can name it, we can interrupt it and reimagine it. So the cyclical nature of it allows us to name it over and over and over and notice it quicker before we even engage with it. And the last thing I wanted to just emphasize in terms of level setting, if you just go to the next slide, is that when you're doing this work right, you'll have people that will have a counter argument. And as a champion in a space, it's important for you to be ready for it. And the beautiful thing about the argument is that we have an antidote, right? And so what we commonly hear when we're asking people to embed and center racial equity in their work, oftentimes the arguments are, but is this really our mission? Won't that turn some people off? When will we have time to do this? What does that mean for my area or my role? Will I get called out? Will I have to call someone out in terms of the work as we move forward? And the beautiful thing is that to help you along this journey, there's some great antidotes and some responses to it. To the mission question, let the data prove the point. Bring in leaders from your community to go through the process and share their stories, ground it into actual qualitative data, right? In terms of turning people off, it's important for us to engage around the assumptions from the audience and recognize and identify supportive ways that they can be in the room and be able to be a part of the leadership in talking about this. When we have time, recognize that we have choice points. And these choice points add up to big, big change in our community. And when we exercise those in a way within our spheres of influence, which are the things that we can control, it can be very powerful. And what does that mean for my area or my role? recognizing that the transitioning of not only staff, but issue areas within your giving circle would actually provide an opportunity for you to have different conversations and engage new networks in your work. And the last thing in terms of, will I be called out? The reality is this is a learning space for all of us, and conflict is a natural part of the process. So we have to get comfortable with conflict, because sometimes this work just creates discomfort. And part of the conflict is for us to wrestle with it, to build our capacity, our muscles around it, and to just talk about it. I know that sounds simple, but oftentimes we just don't do that in our communities and in our work. The reality is, when we see each other, when we can have these conversations, we will trust each other and trust the space enough that we could grapple with this in a way that's really impactful for the communities that we want to serve. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Tracey. Thank you so much. And I think that also level sets us to understand why we do this work and why it's intentional. What we want to know is from perspective of the giving circles, Muhi, can you speak to, well, Muhi and Tracey, but really we want to know how you were intentional in focusing on racial equity in your giving circle.
Yeah, for me, and again, like Tracey, thank you so much for that level setting understanding of racial equity work and why it's so critical. A lot of the times, you know, I often will do things because I feel like it is the right thing to do. And I'm glad that a lot of that also aligns with everything you just said. And to see that there is a critical framework around this is also helpful. For me, I often go back to, you know, what is my North Star? What are my values? And a lot of the times for my identity as an American Muslim, I look to people like Malcolm X, whose birthday was yesterday. I look to Muhammad Ali. I look to Ilhan Omar. I look to Rashida Tlaib. And all of these people have faced injustice in their life. All of these people have gone through so many challenges and barriers. And I always think of the framework. Many of you have probably seen the image of, you know, reality, equality, equity, and justice. And it's a group of people watching a ball game, right? And there's a fence there. One of them's taller, one of them's shorter, one of them's really small. But the reality is they're not on the level playing field. But equality, you give them each, you know, a box to stand on. They each have that box, but still one of them's taller than the other, right? Equity is you give a few boxes to the shortest person, they get to stand up, they're all seeing it equally, but there's still that fence, right? Everybody gets the support they need. Equity is a great place to be, but really it's that justice. Get them onto the field, get them looking at it, get them involved, activated, becoming that champion that Tracey was talking about. So I always go back to, you know, what is guiding me in this work? And what are my values and what is my North Star? So I pose that question to the audience as well, to think of, you know, why are you in this space? Is there a giving circle that you're passionate about starting? Or is there a group of people that you want to be supporting as a member of a current giving circle? And when it comes to American Muslim Community Foundation, you know, we host 8 giving circles right now. Many of them were hosted before we came along. They were operating independently, but then joined AMCF's network because we wanted to provide them with the administrative support of vetting the charities, of collecting the funds, of distributing it based on their recommendation. So one in particular is the Bay Area Collective Giving. Now, these are families who are distributing $5,000 each. And this is part of their zakat, their obligated tithing. So they specifically wanted to help inner city organizations in the Bay Area who are helping the local community. Not even that they're helping just Muslims, they're helping the local community. And one of them is a feeding project called Muhi in Oakland. And the other is an organization called Taiba Foundation, which helps incarcerated individuals, and then as they come out back, integrating into society to help reduce the rate of recidivism. So these were families who, you know, have privilege, they have access to charitable giving. Many of them are not, you know, many of them are, you know, Asian or Arab, not necessarily reflective of the communities they're helping, but they wanted to give back and they wanted to make a difference. So a lot of the times it's tough because when people come from a place of privilege, like, and they want to do good, how are they integrating these racial equity values? And we don't want it to come as like a handout or for us to say like we're the saviors in this, right? But like, how are we being influential and strategic in providing more equity and justice to level the playing field for others? Another prime example is this same group last year during the height of COVID-19 moved up their grant making timeline so that they could distribute funds quicker. So, you know, another example is we're launching an American Muslim Women's Giving Circle, and the end membership drive is through the end of June. So people are coming together, they're now just starting this process of what are the types of organizations we want to support. And there is a racial equity lens in their guidelines. So, you know, I'll stop there and let Tracey share a little bit more. But, you know, as an organization, like we are still trying to challenge ourselves to be more reflective of the Muslim community. You know, it's 25% Black, 25% South Asian, 25% Arab, and, you know, like about 8% Latinx. Like we need to be more representative of the entire Muslim community in the United States. And we're working on that to be reflective in our staff, in our board, in our grant making. So we're just trying to push the envelope in all of these areas.
Thank you, Muhi. Just to tell you a little bit about CoThinkk. CoThinkk is based in Asheville, North Carolina, and our footprint spans all of Western North Carolina. And CoThinkk was birthed out of seeing this amazing work that was bubbling up from leaders of color across the region, but not having the support or visibility regarding the solutions that they were coming up with. And let me tell you, the solutions were powerful, but they weren't being lifted up as the things that would really support structural change and have the impact in communities. And so CoThinkk was really developed out of this desire to figure out how to amplify that work and to elevate it in a way where it was front and center, and leaders had the opportunity to be the drivers of solutions and be seen as leaders around structural change in our community. One of the ways that we're really explicit about racial equity is that we were explicit of naming who the Giving Circle is led by. We're unapologetic that the Giving Circle is led by African American and Latinx leaders. And most recently, as we've been doing our identity work together, because it does take ongoing learning to unlearn, you know, different practices that we've all been a part of in terms of dominant culture, to be able to be explicit. And now we, in addition to using those terms, we talk about Black, Indigenous, people of color as being a part of our Giving Circle as well. But we're explicit that this work is led by people of color because we want it to be clear that this transition of being seen as a philanthropist is really important from a leadership perspective, from a power shifting and power building perspective as we move forward. And we do have allies at the table with us, and allies are white allies or institutional partners that support our work, but all the decisions are made by people of color. One of the things that I want to be explicit in it as well is that, similar to Muhi, we've been explicit about what our values are. We love the values of social change philanthropy because it is very explicit about centering those that are directly impacted by these complex issues. It is very, very explicit about centering equity, in particular racial equity. It's very explicit about the role and the opportunity to be curious and create and support creativity from communities of color and being a part of our work. And the other part that I think that's really clear that I think would be important to lift up is that when we talk about centering racial equity, it also plays out in terms of how we move into community, how we build relationships with one another. One of the things that we're clear about is that at the core of our work, the infrastructure around building healthy, equitable, and positive relationships are front and center. And what that means is that people have to figure out how to be in relationship with one another from a cultural perspective, from a family perspective, from a community perspective. And even with us having a giving circle that's led by African American Latinx leaders, we had to grapple with each other. I remember one of our first meetings together, it was interesting to see that on one side we had African American or individuals who identified as Black not feeling comfortable with the interpretation equipment. Then we had on the other side, we had our Latinx brothers and sisters not feeling comfortable even being in the room in moments with Black and African American folks because we all had these narratives. And so we actually had to come together and reconcile the narrative and interrupt it and create a new narrative and sign a covenant together about how we would move with each other inside of our giving circle as well as outside in the community. And as a result of that work, we said that we're going to do our work in 4 ways. We're going to look at it not as programs or initiatives, but as pathways, because this is an ongoing journey. And we said at the center of our pathway is that we're going to do healing work at every meeting. We're going to talk about healing. We're going to have hard questions. We're going to learn. We're going to grapple with the things that we have to unlearn and relearn to be in community with one another. Then we talked about that we need to be able to build each other's capacity. So we began to create creative ways where we were centering folks as the leaders of capacity building. Oftentimes when we think of capacity building, we think of somebody else, but we tap folks within our network to say, no, you're the leader and the expert around this area. You just haven't had an opportunity to shine in that way. How can we create more space for you to kind of be lifted up as a leader and pay you an equitable pay as a consultant to be able to deliver this for our community and to build our muscles as we move forward? But in addition to that, we said, how can we also create ways that people of color could also have access to resources, right? And what we do in terms of, we know in terms from a cultural perspective that many of the folks from our community talk about their work from a storytelling perspective. And so we use video applications. We don't use paper applications, but we do have paper applications available, particularly as we create a language justice space as an option for individuals that just don't feel comfortable in that way. And the last thing I just wanted to lift up in terms of our work is that we're really explicit about systems change work. We're unapologetic about it. We move our folks into rooms to be the provocateur, to ask the hard questions, and we move them into institutions and leadership positions to be able to have the hard conversations as we move forward. One of the ongoing challenges that we will continue to have as a part of our giving circle, and you'll probably have this too, particularly as you're embedding and centering racial equity, is that a lot of the work around complex social change is being done by communities of color. They're doing the heavy lifting, so they can't always be in the room. So we're constantly figuring out how do we create space for them to have respite, but be in the room and know that we're holding space when they can't be in the room. A great example was particularly when we had a lot of immigration issues that were happening and raids that were happening in our community. It just wasn't safe for our Latinx brothers and sisters to be in the room for us. But we communicated that it was important that we were holding space for them. And so I'm gonna stop there to see if there's questions, and also if you want to move us into the next question, Joe.
Yeah, I want to continue on, and then we'll get questions toward the end because we have a lot of things to cover, a lot of ground to cover, and I appreciate both of you all talking about the values and impact and giving stories about real life, what's happening in your circles, because it's tangible. It really shows what is happening. You all have partnered with several organizations for the lifespan of your giving circles. And one thing I really want to know is, why is it important to partner with grantees and share how the connections have strengthened both your organization and the organizations that you've partnered with or granted to in the past and are currently granting to? Muhi, would you like to start?
Sure. One of the things I also wanted to mention before getting into that is, even our grant review committee, just making sure that they're reflective of the Muslim community across the country. One of the great partnerships through Philanthropy Together was being able to receive funding to share Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, with everybody in a giving circle. So just again, like trying to level set the understanding of the members in the group, and then having them focus on those parameters when they think of the organizations they want to support. And then coming to the organizations and being able to partner with them, a lot of the giving circles invite or self-nominate a charity, right? And then that charity will submit an electronic LOI, keeping it really simple and limited. We're not asking for a 5 to 10 page proposal. It's really like 500-word responses to like 3 questions. And once they do that, the members review the docket and they vote, and the top 3 will be invited to present to the entire group. And now when these 3 come and are presenting, they're guaranteed funding. So we're not wasting their time at this point. They know that they will get some level of funding, and then based on their presentations and then the votes from the families, a certain percentage is allocated. Generally, we've seen 50% to first place, 30% to second place, 20% to third place. Sometimes those numbers vary, but in general, that is the split of funding for those organizations. And in this process, it's really about the organization demonstrating their need of like why they exist, why it's important for these giving circles to be funding their work, and what it means to them to see the community support their work. And again, we support more than just Muslim-led institutions. So we want to showcase that the American Muslim community cares about the local food bank, the hospitals, the shelters, everything, all the great work being done in the community, because we want to be supporting those basic needs. The idea of philanthropy is to be there for where government services fall short. And unfortunately, the government services fall short in our marginalized and minority communities far more than it does everywhere else. So how can we strategically use our charitable giving, our faith-based almsgiving, to showcase that we care and want to empower local communities across the country through our charitable giving? And hopefully, as a marginalized community, as Muslims in this country who are often targeted through Islamophobia, we can change that narrative of being the other, but actually providing some of this change in this country. So in terms of partnering and connecting with those organizations, it's about showcasing the fact that we are here to learn from the organizations doing the fantastic work in the communities. And instead of nonprofits always having to make the case to their donors of why they should support, we have a group of donors coming to nonprofits saying, we're here to meet you. We're here to empower your work. We want to see you succeed. Let us know how we can help you be successful. So for us, it's more so about learning from those organizations about the impact that they're making every day in their community.
Tracey?
Thank you, Muhi. I love what you just said, and what kept coming up for me as I think about the CoThinkk Giving Circle is from the very beginning, so much of our work around centering and embedding racial equity is about making the invisible visible, right? And so much from the very beginning of our work, because we are a giving circle that's led by African American Latinx leaders and supported by allies, our grantees are our giving circle members. And so they are part of community. And so the conversation that we have in terms of our giving circle work is not necessarily what are the issue areas that we're going to focus on. It's more of how do we build an ecosystem of change in our communities? And what does that mean in terms of the groups that we support, the leaders that we amplify, the infrastructure we build in service to it? And so what you will see is that our grantee partners who are also our CoThinkk members are bringing up and seeding strategies that are focused on healing, that's focused on education, that's focused on economics, that's focused on we have a lot of our partners focus on film and video and getting the story out, the narrative, to Muhi's point, shifting the narrative, you know, because it becomes more visible. The other thing I will say is that in terms of our grant making process and centering racial equity, because our folks, in terms of our people of color, are also our grantees, we actually, in our grant making process, everybody as a part of our membership has the opportunity to give voice and give input in terms of the selection of our final grantees. But there's a small group of 5 to 7 committee that's only comprised of people of color that make the final decision. And that's important. And it's not just about, it's not about symbolism, it's about intentionality, particularly around sharing and building power together. The other thing I would say that we do in terms of really thinking about our grantees and how we partner with them is that in addition to the grants that we give them $500 self-care stipends. Because the reality is our folks are out there doing heavy, heavy work. And many of them have not had the luxury to just even stop and rest. And so those self-care stipends allow them to have some respite on top of the work that they're already doing. And I think the other thing I would want to lift up, maybe 2 more things, is the way we're partnering with our grantee partners too, is that we did something a little bit different this year, particularly given the moment and the movement that we found ourselves a part of, is that we were asking folks, particularly in our community, to really reimagine and restructure social change, right? And what systems need to be and look like in our community. But the reality is for us to support and ask that of our community leaders, we have to give another level of support. So for everybody that applied for our grants this year, they actually had access to 6 hours of coaching. And we partnered with a national entity called Coach Diversity Institute, where all their coaches are trained around equity and inclusion, and their practices are anchored there. And so if you apply, you got 6 hours of coaching, but we didn't stop there. Because our members in our community are also our grantees, we actually selected 14 leaders of color to be trained to get their own coaching certification, because we know that we need to be able to support folks in an intentional way as we move forward. And if we have coaches that look like them, then they will be more empowered to be able to move the work forward and see themselves in other people as they move forward. The other thing I would say that we do in terms of partnering with our grantee partners is that when we talk about partnerships, we talk about our grantees, but we also talk about our institutional ally institutions as well. One of the things that we do with some of our ally institutions, particularly talking about structural change, is that we do this process called ripple effect mapping. Because oftentimes people say, well, what does this mean? What is the impact that's happening in your communities? And so ripple effect mapping is a participatory evaluation tool that helps communities to talk about the complex change and the impact that they're having in communities. And what we found when we did the ripple effect mapping, which we do often, is that our work from our Giving Circle leaders and from our community sits at the center of everyone's work. Everyone is naming CoThinkk and our members as a partner. And the more people see themselves as a partner and they see themselves as connected, the more we can knock down these narratives, right? Or these stories or these perceived barriers that we created in our communities. And so much of that work is shifting our thinking about it. And by really bringing those pieces together, we begin to shift how we're in relationship with one another.
Thank you so much, Tracey. I think, Muhi, you had a couple more things. I know we're going to have to wrap up shortly, but wanted to make sure that we got this part done. This is the meat of the conversation. We know that community knows what community needs, and we want to make sure that we go further together. So please share.
Yes, and as Tracey was talking, I'm just thinking to myself, like, oh yeah, American Muslim Community Foundation also does that. So I wanted to highlight a few things as well. You know, we work with families who have donor advised funds with us. We listen and kind of curate all of those organizations that they support and have created a nonprofit ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, we provide capacity building training, leadership development training. We have a program called the Social Impact Accelerator. So not only are we inviting the nonprofits that the donor advised fund families fund, but also the giving circles and the families and the organizations that they fund. We're inviting them to all of these different services. And I think you make a great point on that executive coaching. And that's actually something that we're literally launching in the next few months. And we're also starting and put forth a grant about a Black Muslim leadership collaborative so that more leaders across the country can receive a monthly stipend, can receive the executive coaching, can partake in the webinars of the Social Impact Accelerator. One of the initiatives that AMCF has been doing the last few years as well is a Black History Month initiative, a Women's History Month initiative, a Hispanic Heritage Month initiative. And again, seeing the intersectionality from within the Muslim community in these communities because they're self-reflective of the overall American Muslim community at large. So those are a few things that we've committed to doing. Obviously, with the height of all the social unrest in 2020, we also led an initiative for AMCF for Black Lives Matter. And we identified organizations that were Black-led and then other organizations that were not Black-led, but doing work in this space so that we could highlight those allies. And we want to bring these initiatives to all of the donor advised fund families, to all of the giving circles that participate. So as an institution, these are the additional services that we can provide the giving circles and donor advised fund families, whereas maybe if they were just doing it on their own, they wouldn't be plugged into these different initiatives.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
These are
go ahead, Joy.
These are great things that you all have shared. I know that the people out in the world of Zoom are getting great ideas and learning lots of things. One of the things that we know for sure is the impact. You all have talked about it. You talked about the stories of how it works. We've talked about how we get into our community because we listen to our community. We talked about trust-based philanthropy, going with our values. I appreciate that you all are looking at this as an understanding that this is hard work in your heart, but it's also hard work. And you all do it with such grace. One of the things that we want to make sure we do is, have a call to action. What are your hopes and dreams for your giving circle? And something that you would tell others as they look at embedding racial equity in their giving circle now and beyond. Who would like to kick it off?
Yeah, I would say in terms of my hopes and dreams for CoThinkk is to really be able to. So I will say that in terms of our work, in terms of our structure, our work is and the funds that we generate on a yearly basis is from grassroots leaders to grassroots leaders. And we use a strategy where we are able to leverage that with additional funders that are aligned with us and with no strings attached. So if you want strings attached, we're not the partner for you, right? So as a result of that, we give probably 90 to 95% of our funds out every year that we raise. For the first time, we negotiated and have a donation that came down from the city of $500,000 to continue to support our efforts as we move forward. And so as I think about that money, it may sound like a lot of money, but it's not when we talk about systems and structural change. My vision and my dream for our giving circle is to grow a $100 million fund that allows us to really go deeper around structural change and using the money that we got from the city and other resources as a seed to get other funders to match us and other stakeholders to match us as we move forward. The thing that I love about that's happening in our community too is that we understand the power of networks, and we also know that we need to create space for leaders to show up in multiple places to be leaders. And so much of our work over the coming year will be about identifying and really supporting leaders to move into positions of power across our region and ranking them from low barrier entry to medium to high barrier entry and supporting them to be successful in their work as they move forward. We know that we need everyone at the table. The more we're able to create space, voice, opportunity, and build authentic relationships, we know we can be more powerful and have the impact that we want to have in our community. And I think that the action that I would put forth in terms of the giving circles that are joining us today is that I would ask you, as you're doing your work, be mindful of making it very relational, not transactional. and really getting to the root cause. I know it takes much more work to go to the root causes, but we'll be better for it as a whole community of giving circles doing this work.
Muhi?
Yeah, echoing everything Tracey said, like, you know, I'm a big dreamer. I'm a big believer in, storyboarding and putting your strategy out there and speaking truth to that. I started the conversation with admiring Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. And it really comes from a place of love, because each of them spoke truth to power. Each of them saw a vision and held to it, even at their own self-detriment. And I believe when we want to pursue equity, we need to be a voice for those without a voice. We need to be 100% committed in everything that we do, that at the end of the day, we are uplifting those who don't have the power, that don't have the ability or the access to promote those things. And I love the idea of coming together with others, of collaborating, of dreaming. And to me, that's what a giving circle is, right? It's about how are we going to change our community with our voice? How are we going to change our community with our resources? What are we going to do to build that local or global community that we want to live in one day, right? And it's about moving the needle forward. And one of the dreams that I have has obviously been building American Muslim Community Foundation. And just looking back over the last 5 years, like, I'm so thankful to partners like Joy and Tracey and Sarah and Philanthropy Together, and so many fantastic partners that are dreaming with us every single day. And for me, one of those dreams is to put an ask out there to mainstream philanthropy, to say we value the voices of the American Muslim community, that we value the diversity that is reflected in the American Muslim community. And we want to support the work of the American Muslim community, because the American Muslim community is here giving back to the basic needs, helping for the advocacy of marginalized and minority communities. And because we are reflective of all of those communities here within the United States. The Harvard Pluralism Project stated that that Muslims were in America as early as 1100, that a third of slaves that were brought to America from Africa were Muslims, that, Muslims in America is nothing new, that we have been here for every generation of America. And we need people to see that, to humanize us, to be with us. We're your neighbors, we're your friends, we're everything that makes this country amazing. And I often get jaded because so many people maybe lose sight of that. And there's so many inequities in this country, and it can be so frustrating. But when you work together with like-minded people in a giving circle, in a movement, that's where the magic happens. And I want people to come back to that, because if you can find those people who want to support common causes with you and be the change, that's when you're going to do great things. So I'll leave it at that.
I think that's wonderful. We know that this works. You all are representing how it works. You all are being the change that you want to see. I am so excited to be able to share this panel with you. We have, if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat really quick. But I wanted to just let you all know that, I'm excited about the work that you all are doing. I'm cheering you from the sideline. I'm walking with you all. We appreciate all of that. We know that enhancing our communities with embedding racial equity will make us all move forward to a more just society. And we know that that's important for us to even be here today and in the future. So I know we have about 3 minutes. So wanted to make sure that everybody understands that we have a survey that is going to be coming on after this and join the next session that comes on. I think both Tracey and Muhi have put some contact information, some resources. Someone asked about the slides. They will be in the portal, I believe, for the We Give Summit. There are a lot of great information, a lot of great people on the session today. We appreciate you all coming out and listening to us. And we hope that you got something out of it and enjoyed the session today. The survey was just popped up by ISIS, so please, please, please make sure that you, fill that out, because it will make the sessions better and our learnings better. We hope that we were able to help you learn a little bit more about embedding racial equity into your giving circle today. Any last words? You got 2 minutes, Tracey. I know you got something. I can see it betting in you. So I'm gonna let you close it out.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, and feel free to reach out to us, because this work is not easy, but together we can come up with solutions and dream about what's possible. And I would encourage you to reach out to us, reach out to other giving circles that are experimenting as well. But if you center community, they'll tell you exactly how to be engaged with them, how to center them into the work, how to invite them into the work. And I think that's what we need, and I think that's what's going to be powerful as we move forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to share space with you. I put in a chat a TEDx about the work of CoThinkk. If you want to just click on that to see a little bit about and learn more about our work, as well as our website, and to see how we can be a support. Thank you.
And one more thing, just so you all know, last year, Racial Equity Community of Practice was started by Philanthropy Together and CIN. And this year we will continue that. So please join it. We'll have more in-depth conversations like this and more to really get deep into the work and really be intentional about how we actually change the world. Thank you so very much, and have a great day.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody.